Hello everyone, my name's Tom McKinney and I'm the Programme Manager in Sheffield for Music in the Round, currently locked down just outside Glossop in Derbyshire. And like all of you, really missing Sheffield, really missing the Crucible Theatre and the absence of our brilliant but bonkersly intense chamber music festival has left me feeling a bit empty, to be honest. And I know that speaking to lots of you, lots of audience members back in the ancient era of 3 months ago, whatever it was, one of the concerts that you, me, so many of us were looking forward to in the festival was Paul Lewis's Beethoven recital. When Paul last played for us back in March 2016, it was really one of the standout concerts for me, part of my time at Music in the Round. So getting him back for an all Beethoven evening in this big Beethoven year felt like something so special, playing 2 Pianist Sonatas and the Beethovens Variations. But anyway, that will happen at some point. But for now, and this is so great because Paul has joined us to tell us about that planned concert and also just generally about Beethoven. Paul Lewis, welcome to the Sheffield Chamber Music Festival at home, and thanks so much for doing this.
No, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Well, just thinking about this year in general, let's leap straight into Beethoven. It's the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. For a pianist especially, you've got so much choice. I mean, there's so much extraordinary music he wrote for the instrument. How did you go about refining the pieces that you wanted to play, pieces that you wanted to be associated with in terms of your relationship with Beethoven? How did you go about doing that for this year?
Well, actually, this year I've come out of a 2-year project playing Haydn sonatas, Haydn, late Brahms, and Beethoven bagatelles. The final program in that series, which was last year, included the Diabelli Variations. So that was like a little intro into the Beethoven anniversary year, if you like. So I thought, Diabelli Variations with what it is, is really arguably his greatest piano work. It would be a good idea to carry that through to the anniversary year and to pair it up with something else. And I just chose the Opus 27 sonatas because they're such wonderful and original pieces. And of course, Diabelli Variations, there's, it's just, there's nowhere it doesn't go. There's nothing that it doesn't explore. And it just seemed really fitting to play that this year. But as it turned out, well, I got to play it a few times, but not as many times.
Of interest, what have you got lined up for concerto work? Which concertos were you intending to do this year?
This year?
The Beethoven ones, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was all 5.
Okay.
I had quite a few cycles planned this year, concerto cycles. The first one would have been in 2 weeks in Barcelona, and then there were several over the summer. There was one here in the UK. There was one in Tanglewood, one in the Tiroler Festspiele. They've all gone. I think 2 of them, a few of them have been postponed till next year. So let's hope we're in a better place by then.
Beethoven 251, will it be?
Yeah, I get the feeling. I don't know. I imagine Beethoven's a bit unimpressed with what's going on at the moment in his anniversary year, but we can make it up to him next year, hopefully.
Well, I mean, I want to look at the program in detail shortly, but just your connection with Beethoven. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would say that he's the composer that's been central to your career. Can you remember, though, going back to childhood, maybe the first piece you heard or the first piece you played by him? When did this name Beethoven kind of come into your head? When did he register with you?
It's all a bit hazy, but my first really conscious memory of engaging with a piece of Beethoven was the 4th Symphony. When I was growing up in Huyton, just outside Liverpool, and the library had a lot of records, a lot of LPs that I'd go there every week and take a few out. And the 4th Symphony, I think it was just the first Beethoven symphony that I happened to lay my hand on, and took that LP out. And particularly the transition from the introduction into the main first movement. That I just remember being completely struck by that, completely knocked out. I think I was about 8 years old. Just the energy of it, the force, the positivity of it, really, I don't know, just really sort of bowled me over. And the first piece I played, as far as I remember, was Opus 10 number 2, F major sonata. So one of the earlier ones, obviously one of the smaller ones, but pretty tricky. I'm sure I played it dreadfully, and I was about 12. The last movement in particular is really hard. I think it was probably all over the place, but nevertheless, it's a great first sonata, you know, because it's just so full of energy. So yeah, that I think that was my first Beethoven piece. Not entirely.
He's been part of your life and your career ever since, I guess. And one of the things, actually, that whenever there's lots of chat about Beethoven, there's always some people who pop up who are kind of spittingly, angrily critical of Beethoven as well. And not always just about the music, actually, sometimes about the amount of time and resources that go into programming Beethoven in concerts today. But I wonder whether you've ever gone through a period of kind of falling out of love with Beethoven, disliking him, maybe just being ambivalent, avoided programming or playing him at any point.
No, I don't remember that at all. Thing about Beethoven is, you know, a lot of the sonatas I've been playing now for, you know, nearly 30 years. And you think, well, okay, that's enough time for something to get stale, isn't it? Or just to get sick of it. But that doesn't happen. Every time you come back to it, there's always something that you didn't see before. It's really bottomless in its range and possibilities. It's just, and I think that's true of all great music. You know, that the greatest music will always show you something different. You leave it for 10 years or whatever, and you come back to it, and you think you know it, because you spent a lot of time with it, but there's always something new. And that's certainly the case with Beethoven. You know,
do you think any other composer do you think any other composer is comparable in that respect, in terms of it being a lifelong project? And even when you get to the end of it, you're still kind of not there. Even you've still got, you know, maybe the very last notes of Beethoven you play in your life, you still might feel that you've got so much more to do. Does any other composer compare, do you think?
Maybe not in terms of the sheer range of Beethoven, but I do find something similar with Schubert. You know, Schubert is equally unattainable for me. I think that's what keeps it, one of the things that keeps it fresh and keeps it, you know, sort of keeps you engaged with it, because you just never feel like you get there. There's always more to do, and you climb the mountain so far, and then you look up and the peak has actually gone further out of your view. It's a bit like that. So I think, you know, spending time, that's why it's important to spend time really with the greatest music, the greatest music that convinces you more than anything, because that way, you know, that's the music you play. It's the best chance you've got of convincing other people of its greatness. You know, there's no point in spending time with music that you're ambivalent about, really.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, great music. This program you put together, which was the 2 Opus 27 sonatas and the Diabelli Variations. I mean, not only in particular the second sonata, which has got the subtitle Moonlight, which we can come to in a moment. That greatness there, though, is so different, because the greatness of those Opus 21 in comparison with what the Diabelli Variations is, they're so different in scale and size, and yet you would consider all three equally great. I mean, that's what I find about Beethoven, is that enormous range in scale. It can be huge in scale like Diabelli, or small in scale like the Opus 27 number 1, and yet you would consider them both to be great.
Yeah, I think one of the things that relates to that is that it's all groundbreaking. You know, all these pieces were groundbreaking in their time, but they're groundbreaking in a way that, you know, they still sound original in 2020. The Opus 27 number 1, of course, these two sonatas have the subtitle Quasi una Fantasia. So what does that mean? A fantasy is something that that doesn't follow a predetermined structure. It's much freer. So they're sonatas, but with an element of freedom. In fact, these pieces are actually very structured, but just not in the typical sonata sense. That they're just different. And the E flat is particularly, I think, original in that sense. It opens with this very calm, serene music, with this typically Beethovenian eruption right in the middle of it. Where you think, where does that come from? Its effect is so shocking, but it's still shocking today. It would have been utterly shocking then, but more than 200 years later, its effect is still overwhelming, and that's that's testament to the music that it is and what it does for us.
I mean, Opus 27 number 1. It's a 4-movement piece, isn't it? But they flow without break.
Yeah,
which is a complete contrast to, I guess, a more slightly traditional form of the Opus 27 number 2, which is a 3-movement, I guess, modelled on a Haydn type of piano sonata, which has attained this nickname Moonlight, which has absolutely nothing to do with Beethoven, does it? Tell us about this title, this subtitle, then.
Well, the Moonlight title, we've got the poet Ludwig Rellstab to thank for that. And I think it wasn't until some years after Beethoven's death that he came up with this name. So Beethoven had no idea that it was going to be called the Moonlight Sonata, and Rellstab said it evoked the sense of the moonlight reflecting on Lake Lucerne. So it's a very kind of romantic idea, but in a way, a very unchallenging idea. And this thing about Beethoven is that he always challenges you. There's something quite confrontational about Beethoven. It's never easy. It's not easy to play. It's not easy to listen to because he always asks you difficult questions. So the Moonlight Sonata, I think, somehow makes it easier for us, where it's not necessarily that easy. If the first movement is supposed to evoke that kind of scene, Czerny, for instance, who studied, played a lot of Beethoven's piano works to Beethoven, talks about the first movement as it reminds him of a complaining spirit in the distance. And in fact, really, this movement does relate to death in ways that are quite sort of remarkable. It's a lament. And that's a little more, I guess, for some people that makes it a bit more inaccessible or unattractive than the idea of moonlight reflected on the on Lake Lucerne. So it's possibly part of what's made it so famous and so popular. But actually, there's more to it, and I wonder if the title in some way is a kind of hindrance to understanding what that piece really tells us.
I mean, those names were often dreamt up by publishers, weren't they, for people to latch onto, to buy, and particularly with Haydn, which sometimes are completely unrelated to music, aren't they? Just I wonder though that I'll tell you, for selling concerts and marketing and promotion and things, having a title like Moonlight is fantastic. But you say a hindrance. Do you think it hinders you you're saying that our perception as a listener, but does it hinder you as a performer as well? Because that baggage of, maybe, is it impossible for you, for example, not to think of Moonlight, even as you're playing it and you want to maybe rid your mind and think something else? Is that still there, that connotation of Moonlight and everything that evokes?
No, not really. I think you just get into the character of the piece. The more you go into it, the further away you get from all the stuff around it. That's just the pleasure of studying, of working at this music. But yeah, you're right. In terms of marketing, it's a gift, isn't it? To have Moonlight Pathétique, Appassionata. Yeah, well, fine, sell the whole. And there are places where, certain countries where you almost have to have a named piece in the program. It's almost a given that you have to include something that the public can latch onto. and promoters, some places are very reluctant not to have that, you know. But yeah, and I think you mentioned Haydn sonatas. Well, sort of Haydn. A lot of the quartets have names. Not so many of the piano sonatas have names. And having just spent 2 years with Haydn, that's come up that, you know, why are Haydn sonatas not as popular? Why do they not come up on concert programs so much? And I thought, is it really something as simple as that the sonatas just don't have names? And there are so many of them that people don't know, you know, which is which, because there are, you know, there's quite a lot.
Yeah, well, I always find, actually, even the ones that I really like, I find difficult to find again because of the, you know, the Havoc and so on, and the way they're categorized, and they are inaccessible in that sense. Whereas, you know, there's those clear-cut 32 by Beethoven,
Yeah.
lots of titles, nice opus numbers to remember. I do wonder whether that's part of it, actually.
Yeah, I thought so too, which is a bit disappointing.
Does it really just come down to numbers?
I know.
But actually, what I want to ask is that the Opus 27 sonatas are, okay, they're two pieces with the same opus name, but were they intended as a pair? Were they ever intended to be performed as a kind of a first half of a concert, maybe?
Oh, I'm not sure about, really. They were published together, obviously, as a set, but whether they were intended to be played as a set, I don't think there was much of that kind of thinking going on in those days. It's like song cycles, you know, lieder cycles, and for instance, you know, Dichterliebe almost certainly wasn't intended to be performed as a cycle. I mean, it's hard to think that, you know, they were even intended to be performed, because it was more for sort of home situations and sort of salon, and not really concert hall setup. But yeah, whether things were intended to be played as a cycle, I'm not sure that composers really thought too much in those terms. The one thing, though, that binds these two sonatas together is, of course, the edging away from the formality of the sonata, you know, and sort of doing something different with that structure. I mean, keeping a structure, but just pushing the boundary of it, really. So there's that fantasy element. There's also kind of, there are lots of cross references in the piece. So, for instance, in the E-flat sonata, where towards the end of the last movement, you get a reference. There's a passage which he takes from the slow movement just before the coda. In the Moonlight, a bit self-conscious about calling it the Moonlight now after what we've just talked about, but you know, the
Death Sonata, should we call it?
Yeah, the Death Sonata. What the first thing you hear is a broken chord. You know, the melody is sort of in the left hand, but that's the figuration in the right hand is a broken chord. It's of course the same in the last movement. It's just completely different in character and in tempo, but you get these arpeggios and broken chords. And the harmonic progression, while not the same, is very similar. It's related. So in fact, you get the feeling that he's thinking more in terms of a unit rather than separate movements. And I think that's, you know, you can see that also in the E-flat, that he just glues everything together. It's, you know, to be played as a continuous movement. So yeah, it's a departure in terms of his thinking, in terms of unity, and I think that's what possibly glues these two sonatas together more than anything, even though the characters are very different. Yeah.
Well, talking about unity and things being glued together, I guess that's an entirely different challenge and entirely different prospect. We come to the Diabelli Variations, and that was to be the second half of your concert. The first half was the two Opus 27 sonatas, then you would have followed it up with Diabelli. And I mean, Paul, Alfred Brendel, someone you know very well, important to you as a mentor in your early career, someone who played at Music in the Round twice. You'll know this, a very famous quote where he said that it was the greatest of all piano music, the Diabelli Variations. Not the only person to put it that high up as well, by any means. What's your opinion? I mean, I'm not saying, is it number one and then that's followed by number 2, 3, 4, your top 10, but do you agree with that? And if so, why are these 33 variations? Why are they so unique?
They're all unique in character. He never said the same thing twice from one variation to the next. Just the fact that this whole world of character can come out of this completely insignificant, silly waltz is extraordinary in itself. Beethoven clearly had no respect for this waltz that he was sent, and for him, it just becomes, I guess, a source of motivic cells. When you see what he uses from the waltz, there's the bum 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 bum, for instance, the fourth up and down in the left hand, even the repeated chord accompaniment in the right hand, bum 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 bum. It's just repeated chords. It's only an accompaniment. There's no significance really in terms of the waltz. But what does Beethoven choose to use when he wants a theme? He wants a subject for the big fugue, the penultimate variation, right at the end of the piece. He chooses those repeated notes. Bum 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 bum. There's something so. It's just sort of. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to understand how he even came to that. To use a series of repeated notes as a fugue subject, and to build a fugue of such character and such unstoppable energy from that. It's really
to get to the fugue itself, though. That's
yeah.
Weirdly, I don't own a piano, but I do own a copy of Beethoven Variations, which I suspect is your good friend Tim Horton's that he left backstage after a concert a few years ago. So if Tim's watching, I've got it. If you're looking for it,
yeah,
it must be Tim's. I have no idea why I've got it. I was listening to your recording of this last night with the score, and it was you're on about repeated chords, actually. It's when you get to variation 21. Apologies if these are just arbitrary numbers now for you, but
right.
And it sort of clatters in with those repeated chords, and it's just come out of this really serene kind of chorale, and then it goes into that, then an imitation of a Mozart aria from Don Giovanni, which he says in the style of Mozart, something I think he says at the top of the variation. And I was listening to that and thinking, there's lots of big pieces of music. You mentioned Schubert earlier. Those late sonatas are obviously huge in scale, but it's this schizophrenic nature of this piece that really got me when I listened to that last night. And you absolutely crash in 21 in the most kind of dramatic way after what you've just come out of. And I just thought, your brain, it was difficult for me to think about how on earth you were processing this, because it's huge in scale, but yet in the time, it's made up of these 33 microscopic pieces of music. And how you stitch it together, and whether you're actually fully conscious as you're playing, or whether you just have to sort of let muscle memory take over. I was just baffled by that point, because it never really struck me that, okay, it's a huge piece, but it's actually tiny as well, tiny little things just stitched together. I wonder what your brain is doing as you're going through this piece.
Well, I think what your brain does in performance is different from what it does when you're practicing and trying to work it all out, because it's in your practice that you kind of work out how it all stitches together, and you can see sections. There are groups of variations, and for instance, the first 10 variations for me is more of a progression. There's more. It's more consequential, sort of how he builds from one variation to the next. After that, he becomes a little bit more abstract, and later on, much more abstract. Contrast is such an important aspect of Beethoven's writing. I mean, throughout his whole composing career, he's the master of contrast. But I think he just takes it to a different kind of extreme in this piece, where he'll take, you mentioned, I'm just sort of getting my variations in order now. You mentioned variation 21. Now I know which one that is. Variation 20 is is actually bang in the middle in terms of time, in terms of duration. It's right in the middle of the set, and it includes some just inexplicably wonderful harmonies. I'm going to say inexplicably because you can't explain what those harmonies are really. There's no logic to it. They don't really kind of they don't have a logical progression. But the effect is that it just takes you to a completely different world, of course, and then this variation just sort of peters out into silence. And it's really sort of cloaking that variation with silence, which is the thing, you know, that's the effect of it. But out of that silence, it's exactly what you say. It feels like you're punched in the face. And then from that point, he does more and more of that. You know, he'll take you to somewhere sublime, and he'll leave you there for a few seconds to just sort of take that in, and then he'll just knock it straight down. You know, he'll just throw something completely different at you. And there's a brutality in that, actually. But I also think there's some humor in it, because there is humor in this piece. There are one or two variations that do make an audience laugh out loud, that are obviously funny. And there's some other variations that don't necessarily make people laugh, but you feel that it's a kind of in-joke with Beethoven. For instance, the first variation, where you've had this silly waltz as the theme, and he follows it with this equally silly march, this sort of brainless, pompous kind of march that's just, it's completely one track, you know, that there's no variation in that at all. And I wonder if that's Beethoven having a little laugh to himself. You know, it's not necessarily going to make people laugh who hear it, but I think there's humor at different levels going on in this piece, and
which also actually really challenges a popular perception of Beethoven as, you know, this composer sort of laden with tragedy and, you know, a life of torment and torture. This is a piece that really challenges that, doesn't it? Really.
Yeah, but it is that too. You know, it is full of tragedy and torment and drama and tension and all these things, but it's full of humor, and I do get increasingly, the more I play it, I get the feeling that there's all the seriousness of Beethoven in that piece, and yet there's a side to it where you feel Beethoven isn't quite taking himself seriously. You know, or that he's able to step outside of it and look at it and just kind of look a little bit sideways at what he's doing. I do feel that. I don't know whether it's hard to convey that in a performance, but I feel it's there. You know, it's all there, and I can't think of another piece of Beethoven that's quite like that. You know, the Hammerklavier, the other great peak of his piano writing, just doesn't have the same kind of humor at all. It doesn't have any sort of lightness about it. It's all intensity. You know, it's all tragedy and drama and you know, the slow movement is 18 minutes of continuous suffering. You know, there's no escape from that. And then the fugue is 12 minutes of pianistic terror. You know, it's all there. Was Diabelli, it looks in all directions, you know, and by the time you get to the end of it, you really feel that you've looked all the way around. You're standing on the peak and you can see everything, or you have seen everything somehow, and that's different. That's what makes it unique.
Well, Paul, I listened to your recording of it last night. Actually, I put together what the concert would have been, and I listened to it last night. So, I thought your recording of Diabelli was just, yeah, I mean, it's just so aggressive at times. And then I mentioned schizophrenic. You would just suddenly, wow, the sound, as you said, the 20th variation, which just dies away, and you just smashed into 21. And it was shocking, and in the best possible way. And I think that the tragedy of all of this is that now, you know, as part of what we planned for May, our audience aren't going to hear that. But Paul, just very briefly, I'll let you crack on with whatever you're doing in lockdown. But life in lockdown, I mean, what is it like for you, having the chance to enjoy the piano with right now, no immediate pressure of performance. How does that feel? I guess
Well,
it's a very, very unique experience for you that you've not had for quite some time.
yeah, in some ways, it's the sabbatical that many of us never took, and of course, it, sort of, I daren't even say it, but it's great to have the time to explore new repertoire and fill the gaps, the important pieces that you may never have had time to learn. I've been filling those gaps in my Mozart concerto repertoire. I've learned the Ravel concerto and been looking at some Debussy piano music, and it's all wonderful. I really want to play this, but on the other hand, we all have our low moments and worries and anxieties, and just not knowing how we're going to come out of this. I think music we're very lucky to have music to be able to take us away from it to some extent. But of course, we're all living in this new reality as well. I still think of it as a temporary reality, because we will get back, of course. We will return at some point. We just don't know how and when. But yeah, I think we all have our own story with it and our own way of dealing with it. For me, practicing, being at home with the kids, trying to help them with their schoolwork, and trying not to do too much damage in the process.
Well, I've had to take all of the artwork down from the wall behind to make it look all those pictures of rainbows behind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well.
Yeah, there are some really nice parts of it, aren't there? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Paul,
Yeah.
I'll say it again. I'll repeat what I said right at the start. So many of us were so looking forward to your concert, but this really has been great. I know that so many of our audience are going to love to hear you talking about Beethoven, this music that you know so well. And for everyone watching, as I mentioned just now, Paul's recorded all the pieces he was due to play. I put them together and listened to it in concert on my own last night. I can tell you it's a very, very fine way to spend an evening. Paul Lewis, from all of us at Music and Around, thank you so much for this, and we look forward to seeing you in concert again very soon. Thank you so much.
Hope to see you very soon. Thank you.
And just finally from me, all of this content we're making for the Sheffield Chamber Music Festival, the guest artists like Paul, Ensemble 360, it's all available to you for free. But if you think you could make a donation to help us with all of our future programming ideas, and we have lots of ideas at Music and Around for how we're going to come back out of lockdown, you can find a link. I'm going to point to it below. You can find a link just there in the video description. But for now, take care of yourselves, and from all of us at Music and Around, we will be seeing you again very soon. Thank you.